racism is an illness. It's a mental illness. I believe that. It's one that can be cured.
Daryl Davis Jr. has made it his life's mission to change minds and fight hatred one friendship at a time. It's not every day you see a black man befriend members of the Ku Klux Klan.
But here in Maryland, a man has made it his mission to befriend as many members of the Klan and other hate groups as possible.
And not to support their ideas, but to shift their perspectives. Our Brianna Ross talked with Daryl Davis about his journey.
This is the hood. This is the mask.
A collection of Ku Klux Klan hoods, robes, and regalia sit in Daryl Davis's home, each with their own story.
He was a Grand Dragon of Baltimore. His day job, when he was trying to bomb the synagogue, Baltimore City police officer.
As a black man, Davis has never worn any of these items. He disagrees with all they stand for. The items belong to former Klan members.
Roger Kelly's Imperial Wizard robe.
People Davis befriended, symbols of his ability to change minds.
A Klansman or Klanswoman or a neo-Nazi is not born with that robe and hood or that swastika. That is acquired. It's learned behavior, learned ideology. What can be learned can be unlearned.
Davis first learned about racism when he was just 10 years old. He was attacked by white spectators as the only black Cub Scout marching in a parade in Massachusetts in 1968.
So at that age, I formed a question in my mind, which was, how can you hate me when you don't even know me?
Decades later, after meeting a member of the Ku Klux Klan who was impressed by his musical performance, the question came back to Davis's mind.
Who better to ask that question of than someone who would go so far as to join an organization with over 100-year history of practicing hating people who don't look like them or who don't believe as they believe. Get back in contact with that Klansman and get him to fix you up with the Klan leader from Maryland. Start in Maryland, then go up north, go down south, go to the Midwest, go to the West, and interview other Klan leaders and members and write a book.
So Davis asked the Klan member he met to connect him with the Grand Dragon of the Klan in Maryland, Roger Kelly.
He warned me. He said, Daryl, do not fool with him. He will kill you. And I'm like, well, that's why I need to see him. Why would he kill me? Just because of the color of my skin. This makes no sense. This is what I'm trying to understand.
Davis had his assistant set up an in-person meeting with Kelly and his bodyguard in 1990. Never mentioned Davis is black.
When they came into the room and saw me, they like freaked, they froze.
But they stayed and talked to Davis, the beginning of an unlikely friendship.
If you spend 5 minutes with your worst adversary, you're going to find something in common, and that gap is going to narrow. And what's happening is, it's causing a cognitive dissonance in their brain. Because at this point, they have found so much more in common with you than they have in contrast.
Davis spent time with Kelly, even went with him to KKK rallies, and earned his respect.
I will follow right man to hell and back, because I believe in what he stands for and he believes in what I stand for. A lot of times we don't agree with everything, but at least he respects me to sit down and listen to me, and I'll respect him to sit down and listen to him.
And after years of listening, one day Kelly surprised Davis.
He goes, I'm leaving the Klan. I'm shutting it down. Now, he wasn't handing it off to his second in command. He was shutting down his chapters. Okay, and he had like 13 of them in 13 different states. And I was totally shocked.
And Kelly is not the only one. Davis documents his experiences with Klan members across the country in his 2 books, Clandestine Relationships and The Klan Whisperer. He's befriended many Klan members, leading many to leave the group and give him their robes.
I know that over 200 have left.
How do you think that your approach of building understanding with people who think differently from you can translate to what we're seeing today in a world that's so polarized?
I can tell you this, every human being on this planet wants these 5 core values in their lives. Everyone wants to be loved. Everyone wants to be respected. We all want to be heard. We all want to be treated fairly and truthfully. And we all want the same things for our family as anybody else would want for their family. And if we can learn to apply those 5 core values when we find ourselves in an adversarial situation or in a culture or society in which we are unfamiliar or uncomfortable, I'll guarantee you that your navigation of that situation, that culture, that society will be much more smooth, much more positive, and much more productive.
Wow.
And Davis says he wants to open a museum for all of the robes and regalia he's collected over the years. He's also a musician, and you can catch him performing at the Birchmere in Alexandria in Virginia on February 22nd and speaking at New Spire Arts in Frederick on March 14th.
Man, I could listen to him all day.
He's
so many dimensions to him.
just so profound, so much of what he said, and we put the full interview online because there's so much we couldn't even get to in the story.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts is the communication. If you're willing
Yes.
to talk about it and be able to sit down and have those conversations, that's where you can get somewhere.
And have a conversation with someone who's even
Right.
offending you
Exactly.
by some
Right.
of their belief systems.
And not
so.
being afraid of that conversation, to go and confront it and say, let's talk about the things that we have in common.
Yeah.
I mean, the 5 core values that he talks about. I mean, the relationship between Daryl Davis and Roger Kelly.
Yeah.
I mean, that alone.
We can all learn a lot.
Right?
Yeah.
Thank you for doing
Thank
this. That was
you.
very
Brianna.
powerful.